All right, so I think the best place to start is let's start from the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Although I think I'm going to start from the from chapter one, um, and uh, and leave the prologue as an exclusive for you if you want to get the book. Um, so we're going to start from chapter one. This is the Dance of Dreams. Um, the tagline is when their entire bloodline is threatened, will the bold actions of two fearless women trigger catastrophic consequences. This is the fifth and final book in the Stains of Time series, out today, September 27th, 2022. And I'm going to be reading from chapter one. And because it's the beginning, you don't need to know anything. You just have to sit back and enjoy. Just sit back and enjoy the dulcet tones of my voice. Probably go for 10-50 mellifluous, the mellifluous sounds of my voice. Thank you, Kit, in the chat. Yeah. Chapter 1. Belinda. Who are you? That was the question on the professor's mind as Belinda walked into his classroom that first afternoon. She could hear it in his head from across the way, could hear that it was, who are you? And not, who are you? Or, who are you? But she couldn't answer him. Couldn't have answered him even if he asked the question aloud. Not truthfully, at least. Because he wouldn't believe her. How could he? So, instead, she just took a seat. At a desk near the back of the room, she tried to keep the inane thoughts of her classmates at bay, and she did her best to focus on the lesson the professor had prepared. It was an English composition course for athletes, and Belinda knew the professor was only teaching it as a favor to the college. She knew this both because he was thinking about it right now, repeating a mantra in his head to give himself strength, and because once upon a time, in another life, he had told her. In that other life, he had been Uncle Matt, and she had been his favorite niece. Your only niece, she used to correct him, and technically speaking, I'm not even that. He'd clutch his chest with both hands whenever she told him this, feign an imminent collapse, and beg to know why she sought to hurt him so. Belinda would laugh, even when she got older, when the joke had long since stopped being funny, and she'd remind him that, technically speaking, they were first cousins once removed. Uncle Matt would rub his forehead with the back of a forearm and slump into the nearest chair. Then he'd say, "That's right, but it's also just semantics, kiddo. You're my niece, and you always will be." Always. Belinda hated that word. It meant nothing, not a thing, not in a world that could end on a whim, that the gods would reboot whenever they were slighted, that would be transformed into something altogether unrecognizable. Belinda had been his niece, until an old woman had meddled with time and given offense to the deities of this place. Now Belinda was nothing. It was like she didn't exist. In fact, she wasn't supposed to. "Welcome," Uncle Matt began. "My name is Professor Silver. I'll be your instructor for the next 4 months. My deepest sympathies." Nobody laughed at his poor attempt at humor. Nobody but Belinda. She took copious notes that first day, and throughout that first course with Uncle Matt as her teacher. From that first meeting in Hasseltine Hall, with the windows open and a warm September breeze rolling across the back of her neck, through the falling October leaves and cold November rain, to the December storms that made her thankful for the underground tunnels which connected the academic buildings to one another. Through it all, she wrote and wrote and wrote. Sometimes she took down what he wrote on the board, his musings on the power of punctuation and the greater mysteries of English grammar, but mostly she just took down her own observations of him. She took note of how different he was from the man she'd known, lively instead of lethargic, loquacious instead of taciturn, and how much he was the same, despite all that had changed. A few of them went out for drinks after the final exam, Belinda praying that Uncle Matt wouldn't ask how old she was, hoping that he'd see the fact that she'd been carded and let into the pub by the bouncer as proof that she was old enough, and leave it at that. Because how would she answer? That's what she found herself thinking as they drank round after round, and her jock classmates discovered that Matt had been a star shortstop before turning to creative writing. How would she answer any of his questions? And, assuming he didn't just laugh her out of the building the moment that she told him, technically speaking, she was about 14 billion years old, how would she stop the questions once they started? That spring, she took a second course with him. It was an advanced workshop in short fiction. It met on Friday afternoons, and it was tradition to congregate after class each week for a libation or three, depending on how thoroughly they'd eviscerated the work on offer that day. An unbroken tradition, since the days when Matt himself was a student at the college. The week that it was Belinda's turn to choose which establishment they would take their business to, she chose her own place, Thestrumpet's sister. "You have your own bar?" asked one of her classmates. Belinda nodded. "Been in the family for years," she told them. Uncle Matt smiled. "Ms. Michelson," he said, "you are just full of surprises." This time around, Thestrumpet's sister was a dive tucked into the basement of an upholsterer's warehouse on the banks of the Merrimack River. It had been many things to many people over many years, and in many places, but Belinda had brought it here to Haverhill with the intentions of keeping it in one spot for a bit. There was a lost love to get over, and she felt like it was about time to stop putting off college. They tucked themselves into a booth in a dimly lit corner of the main room, and all but Belinda picked up menus to peruse which pint might strike their fancy. She considered for a moment why they hadn't asked her for her recommendations. That had been the custom, or become the custom, each week, asking the person who picked the place what they'd recommend. But alas, no one was asking. Was it just that she was the lone chick here, or was it something more than that? Belinda let herself drift into their minds for a moment and realized that none of them were even thinking about asking, which made it somehow worse. It was as she did this that she felt a thought hammering at Uncle Matt's brain again and again, a persistent thing that was testing his defenses. She felt it at first as a pure feeling of panic, only slowly coming to realize the kernel of truth at its core. Uncle Matt had a play happening down on Cape Cod this weekend, and the thought was trying to remind him that it was going to be a disaster. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The play was going to bomb. And why wouldn't he acknowledge that? That's what the thought wanted to know. Now that Matt was done with teaching for the day and should have had time for it, the thought, that is, why wasn't he crying? Why wasn't he hanging his head in shame? Why was he daring to celebrate with his students to honor the work of the week gone by? "Belinda," said Uncle Matt, setting his menu aside, "what would you recommend?" The others, prompted by their professor leading the way, set down their menus as well. And as they all set their attentions on her, their thoughts too, she realized, she blushed. Words failed her. They were cute, the lot of them. Not as cute as her dearly departed Nasha, but no one was. And their lingering gazes, and thoughts, warmed her to her core. It was only a gentle hand on her shoulder that broke her from her panic, a gentle hand attached to a person who brought no thoughts with her. The gentle hand of her only true friend in the world, Ada. "How's everyone doing tonight?" asked Ada, smiling down at the lot of them. "Just fine," said Uncle Matt, offering up a smile of his own. Then he raised an eyebrow. "Have we met?" he asked. "You look wicked familiar." Ada shook her head. "So," she said, "do y'all know what you'd like?" The youngest fellow in their company, a stout psychology major, sat up straight as he spoke, and tried to make himself seem taller than he was. He told Ada that they'd just been asking Belinda for her recommendations, told her this as an interior dialogue broke out in his head over the advisability of sneaking a peek, for even just a second, at Ada's ample bosom. "Well," said Ada, "you can't go wrong with the Sister's Swill. That's her own IPA. But if you're feeling adventurous, there's always the caffeine coffin." Belinda smiled. I can vouch for that, she said. It's a concoction of our estimable barkeep's own creation. What's in it? Asked the art student among them, a bearded heathen who'd made his money drawing commissions of humanoid animals in various states of undress. Ada grinned mischievously. Kahlua and a shot of extra dark espresso mixed with Canterbury dark beer. Across the table, Uncle Matt nodded and chuckled. Who needs sleep? Am I right? He thumped the student closest to him, a lithe gay kid who was pursuing Matt as steadily as he was pursuing his business degree. I'll take one of those, Matt told Ada. Anyone else? The boys declined and ordered a sister's swill apiece, while Belinda went in for her standard tequila sunrise. But before Ada left to fill their orders, Belinda gave a gentle squeeze of her friend's wrist and asked if someone had called out, if that's why she was waiting tables and not behind the bar. Saw you come in, said Ada, giving Belinda a squeeze back. Thought I'd say hi. And then she was off. Later, while she danced with the psych major and the art student in turn, Belinda couldn't help but cast the occasional protective glance over at her uncle. Matt looked like he had fallen into a blissful sleep. He was slouched back into the cushions of the booth's bench seat, and with his eyes closed and one arm around the shoulders of Business Kid. Business Kid, meanwhile, had a pained look on his face. Pressed against the body of his professor, his nose nuzzled into Matt's armpit, Business Kid was a young man torn between lust and good sense. Thanks to the veritable castle of empties strewn across their table, he had finally acquired the company he'd been pursuing for 4 years of college. And yet, as much as his lascivious lizard brain wanted him to take advantage of the situation, Business Kid knew in his gut that he was no rapist. He could not and would not assault his inebriated professor. Nope, not him. Not gonna happen. He kept his hands planted firmly on the table to make sure of it. But Belinda saw the kid's fingers drumming out patterns over and over again, and she didn't know how long his resolve would hold, so she kept an eye on the pair of them, just to be safe. Soon enough, bewildered by the combination of the friend they'd swore was seconds away from giving their professor a hand job, and the girl who wasn't going home with either of them, no matter how well they defied the stereotype about the kinesthetic capabilities of the average white boy, the psych major and the art student said their goodbyes. Belinda made her way to the booth and searched the empties for a swig of something. Sure, she didn't have to pay for drinks here, but the place was hopping, and she didn't want to try and flag Ada down in the middle of this chaos. She was parched, yes, but she wasn't dying. We just about done? Asked Belinda, still searching for something to sip on. I don't know, said Business Kid, sounding terribly depressed. Belinda rolled her eyes at him. He's out, she said. Business Kid slid his pint glass toward Belinda. It was empty except for ice cubes, but ice cubes would do. They would work. The two of them people-watched for a minute, a blissful 60 seconds of silence before Business Kid pitched an idea Belinda's way. You ever seen Wonder Boys? He asked. The one about the writing professor, his agent, and his eccentric student. Belinda nodded. Writers Gone Wild, she said, in Pittsburgh, of all places. Business Kid nodded back. You've seen it, then? She had, and she knew where he was going with this, but she was tired, and she let him. She let him go there, and she let him explain about the protagonist's drunken night at a dive bar, about the scar-faced pompadoured Vernon Hardapple, the game of telling a story about a stranger, and all of it. Business Kid didn't need to know that a game like this against a girl like Belinda was rigged, that she could read someone's mind from across a room. And he didn't need to know that once upon a time she'd played this game with her uncle on the regular, and that she'd always beaten him. Winner's the one who can keep a straight face for the longest, she said, making her only contribution to the conversation. He nodded. You first. She let her mind reach out to find someone in the crowd who would have a laugh at their game if they found out about it, someone who could take a joke and who wouldn't mind a couple of college kids fucking with them. The person she settled on was a jovial chap who'd set up shop at the bar and was talking Ada's ear off by the looks of it. Him, said Belinda, pointing. Business Kid squinted, having taken off his glasses earlier to see if they would make Matt give him more of a chance. "The guy with the mullet?" he said. Belinda scoffed. "It's not a mullet," she said, though she was unsure at this distance. "He's just all sweaty. It's all slicked back." Business Kid laughed. "Whatevs," he said. "You go first." Belinda debated for a second about whether to go with the truth or something more absurd. The truth was the guy was a trucker. They were unloading his rig right now over at the Market Basket downtown, and he was taking a well-deserved break before he got himself back on the long and lonesome highway for the next leg of his journey. "He's a bassist," she said, "for a metal band." "Nah," said Business Kid. "Everyone in your stories is a musician or an artist." "Fine," said Belinda. "He's a hunter. Likes to use the bow and arrow," said Business Kid, nodding. "No guns for him." Belinda nodded, though she knew the guy was packing right now, a tiny pistol tucked away inside one of the many pockets of his enormous jean jacket. Then she added, "He lost half a foot to a hyena on his first trip to Africa." "Filleted his way across the country in the 70s, said Business Kid, "back when hitchhiking was still a thing." "But he's married now," said Belinda, "to a woman. And he's never told her. But she suspects, especially on Sundays when he'll watch football all day but always change the channel before the post-game interviews. Because," said the apparently not-so-sleepy Matt, "he loves the look of a tight end, but he can't handle the sight of their pretty little mouths." Belinda and Business Kid looked at each other from either side of their slumbering professor's body, trying to decide whether a laugh was in order or some other kind of reaction altogether. "I gotta piss," said Matt, blinking his eyes as he sat up straight for the first time in a good long while. "Then one of you has got to drive me home."